Miss Isnardi, can you hear me? Good, thank you. We'll just begin shortly here. We're just waiting on a couple of people. Okay, I'll call this special regional council meeting to order. We acknowledge the traditional territories of the Dene, Cree, and Cree people of the North Fort Nelson First Nations, whose traditional territory is located at the heart of the Northern Rockies Regional Municipalities Administrative Center. We also acknowledge the many Indigenous nations with traditional territory in Northeast British Columbia and the enduring presence of the Métis community. Please be advised that today's meeting is being streamed and recorded. Can I get a motion, please, to adopt the agenda? Moved by Councillor Andrews, seconded by Councillor Souls. All those in favor? Carried. We have a delegation, Ms. Zaglinski, WildSafe BC Program Manager, and Vanessa Insnardi of WildSafe BC. Welcome. You're muted at the moment. I'll do some introductions. Ms. Insnardi, this is Councillor Gerwing, Councillor Andrews, myself, Mayor Foster, Councillor Souls, Councillor Penny, our CAO, Mr. Barry, and our deputy, or our corporate manager, Ms. McIver, and of course, you know, Kim Zaglinski.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you all.
I can see it. Can you see it?
So you all know me. I'm Kim Zaglinski, Wildlife Coordinator for WildSafe BC. I'm joined via Zoom by Vanessa Insnardi, who is the Program Manager for WildSafe BC. And we're here today to present to you the final draft of the Human Bear Conflict Management Plan. You see this slide every time I'm here. We're very proud of this. WildSafe BC is the provincial leader in preventing conflict with wildlife through collaboration, education, and community solutions. It evolved from the highly successful Bear Aware program and is owned and delivered by the BC Conservation Foundation. So just remembering why we are here, what starts all of this, I've got two charts on the screen. One on the left shows you the bear calls that come into the COS service from 2016 to 2021. And the one on the right breaks those down by in the municipality by attractant for the same years. So if you look at this chart on the left-hand side, we can see a slight trend downwards with garbage, but that trend now carries over to fruit trees, and those attractants are slowly going up. You will see that, you know, different months are the peak months, just depending on the year, and that's based on a variety of factors. That's weather, the availability of natural food sources, things like that. On the right-hand side, just having a quick focus here on the garbage, you know, 2021, it was certainly on the rise. Fruit trees are on the rise, garbage is slightly less, but it just kind of shows you that, you know, the program, if we look at 2016 and go to 2021 and just all the blocks, it does show you that the program in certain circumstances is certainly working. Go ahead. I'm just going to turn this quickly over to Vanessa to explain to Mayor and Council and staff the difference between a food-conditioned black bear and a habituated black bear. There seems to be a bit of confusion in the community, and they are very, very different. Go ahead, Vanessa.
Thank you, Kim. So all of the work that we're doing right now is to address the root causes of conflicts. And to do that, we need to understand a bit about bear behavior. So we use two terms very frequently. Human habituation is when a bear becomes more comfortable and less wary around people. And in and of itself, that's not necessarily a harmful thing or a bad thing, but what it allows is, as bears become more comfortable around people, they venture into our communities, and then they find food sources. And when those food sources are not natural food sources, such as garbage that's unsecured or compost, they receive a food reward. We're basically teaching the bears that you will find food in our community, and this is called food conditioning. And a food conditioned bear that when years of less natural foods will spend more time in the community and become more persistent in trying to access those food rewards. So with the thousands of bears we have in our province, we actually have very few conflicts compared to the number of bears because they generally try to avoid us and generally try to avoid our activities, but they're also very food motivated. So when they have easy food sources in our communities, they spend more time here, they cause more property damage. We call this food conditioning. And all of the things you're going to hear about today are ways we can mitigate that and prevent a bear from becoming food conditioned. Because as we know, bears that start destroying property or pose a risk to public safety often have to be removed lethally from the community. And we're trying to avoid these circumstances, not only for the bears, but also to prevent human safety concerns. Thank you, Ken.
So there are a number of reasons a community tries to reduce conflict with bears. In the municipality in Fort Nelson, we've heard loud and clear from mayor and council and staff that here it is a safety concerns for community residents, visitors, workers, and or their pets. That's what we hear, and that's what we're also seeing, hearing from our residents as well. So remembering the bear hazard assessment that was done a year and a half ago, it identified where the bears are coming into the community and why they're coming into the community. These two shots should be common to you. You've seen them a couple of times. On the left is the wildlife attractants. When we were doing the bear hazard assessment, we identified everything: community gardens, municipal trees, municipal garbage, residential garbage, as well as commercial garbage. And we also, then put an overlay on where the calls were coming in on top of that. So it now shows you the hot spots within the community where most of the calls were coming in. It was kind of funny because when I looked at this about an hour ago, I noticed that Midtown wasn't on there. So, and this year, a lot of our calls have come from Midtown. So, that can mean a variety of things, but it could also mean that maybe those areas they had been frequenting before, there isn't as much of a food reward there, and they're now moving on to different areas of the community. So moving to the other screen, the wildlife corridors in Fort Nelson, the CO service, as well as myself and the staff member, sat down. We had a look at the wildlife corridors in Fort Nelson, and it actually pretty much mirrors our community trail. Our community trail, those of you that use it all the time know there's many entrance points, there's many exit points, and what that community trail is doing is allowing wildlife, not just bears, but all wildlife, very, very easy access into our community. Go ahead. So the goal of the HBCMP is to reduce human-bear conflicts, which were identified in the BHA, and in turn, this will lead to a safer community where fewer bears are going to require lethal removal. It's also, the HBCMP is also one of the criteria required to become a Bear Smart community. For this plan to be successful, it needs to be achievable, have clear established goals, timelines, and budgetary support for implementation. But we also need to recognize the barriers, such as budget constraints, capacity, and for the plan to be implemented successfully, it should align with the community's long-term vision. And it is designed to be a living document and be adaptive in nature. We want the municipality to succeed. We want you to be successful. That we've kept that in mind during the entire process of creating this document, identifying areas where budget, might be an issue, identifying issues where capacity might be an issue, and keeping that in mind because it's important for us that you succeed. To that note, the municipality needs to be recognized for the work that they have done, because you've done a considerable amount of work prior to us being here today, starting in 2009 with the implementation of the Bear Response Program, a number of other things that we have listed there, and then in 2020 with the Bear Hazard Assessment being completed, and then today, excuse me, where we're here presenting to you the draft Human Bear Conflict Management Plan. So kudos to the municipality for doing as much work as they have and getting yourself ready for this next process should Mayor and Council approve. A reminder of what the Bear Smart Community Program is. It was designed by the Ministry of Environment in partnership with the BC Conservation Foundation as well as the UBCM. It is a voluntary preventative conservation measure that encourages communities, businesses, and individuals to work together. I think when the CEO Service was here the last time, he talked about responsibilities and that we all have a responsibility. WildSafe BC has a responsibility, the Conservation Officer Service has a responsibility, the municipality has a responsibility, and the residents too also have a responsibility. Together, we can address the root causes of human-bear conflicts, thereby reducing the risk to human safety and private property, as well as reduce the number of bears that have to be destroyed each year. It was developed it was developed based on a report written for the province of BC, and there are approximately 10 communities that have achieved Bear Smart community status, and several others are in varying degrees of undergoing the process. Going back to what you've done again, on the left-hand side are the 6 criteria that a community has to achieve in order to become a Bear Smart community. And on the right-hand side is the significant progress that Fort Nelson has made in regards to becoming a Bear Smart community status. So you've done a lot of work. You're well on your way. You'll see you've completed the bear hazard assessment. We're hoping to, have the human bear conflict management plan wrapped up by the end of the year. The planning documents is going to be for your consideration later on. The ongoing education program, that's ongoing. The solid waste management plan, that's in progress, as well as you've already got that bylaw in place. It's just currently under review, and it will get better. So you're pretty much met or very close to meeting all 6 of those criteria listed. So this is an interesting chart. It's a statistical analysis of black bear reports from 2018 to 2021 that include attractants such as garbage and fruit trees. And it's comparing communities that have achieved Bear Smart status to those that don't. The red line on the top is those communities that are not Bear Smart. The blue line is those that are. It's from January of 2018 to January 2022. And the communities that were designated Bear Smart had 60% fewer calls with attractants. So to get here, it's not just us. There was a lot of groups and a lot of individuals that worked to get us here and helped us to establish the Human Bear Conflict Management Plan, WildSafe BC, the Conservation Officer Service, the Northern Rockies Regional Municipality, Fort Nelson First Nation, and Wide Sky Disposals. The HBCMP also proposes 2 additional members, residents from the community, moving forward, as well as representation from school district number 81. And it is critical to continue to have key staff members continue to participate in the Bear Working Group and for elected officials to adopt and approve its implementation. Primary objectives is to assist in the development of the HBCMP, support the NRM efforts to reach Bear Smart community eligibility, support the municipality in their application, provide annual updates, develop and embrace a community vision that supports Bear Smart principles, and support updates to community decision-making documents that are going to include Bear Smart language. One of the key recommendations that we do make is to maintain the public education program. WildSafe BC can continue to deliver its multifaceted community program. We can increase community participation through a variety of our different programs, and that WildSafe BC and the municipality should promote and continue to connect residents to the local fruit cleaning group, and that WildSafe BC in the future facilitates and promotes electric fencing workshops, and that the municipality continues to fund and support an education program on an annual basis. So I'm going to turn this over to Vanessa again to just discuss the Human Bear Interaction Survey and the importance of it.
Thanks, Kim. So one of the tools that we've developed since the bear hazard assessment that we did with Northern Rockies Regional Municipality, with some more recent ones, is we identified that not all of the conflicts were being reported through the WARP program and through the Conservation Officer Service. So we wanted to gather more information about people's perceptions and what they were seeing in their communities. So we developed a social science survey with a social scientist, Dr. Beatrice Frank, who specializes in human wildlife conflicts. And it is designed to be worded in a way that's unbiased, just to gather information. And basically, we're asking for people's perceptions and views regarding bears in their community, whether they call the Conservation Officer Service or not, and why, and what they would be prepared to do to reduce conflicts in their community. So this survey is just an information gathering survey. It's not to influence public perceptions or opinions, but we feel that it would be a great tool to inform mayor and council and staff as to what the community would like to see regarding bears in their community.
Thank you, Vanessa. It also identifies to WildSafe BC where the wildlife coordinator should be focusing attention and concentrate, different areas of concentration as well. So we're just going to briefly, this is all included in the package you were sent earlier. Some of our recommendations, we're going to go into it just sort of, very quickly, because of course you already have that information. In terms of public garbage and recycling receptacles, we want to ensure that bins continue to be serviced regularly, overflows are addressed, and that all bins are maintained in a good working order. In terms of the curbside carts, put forth a recommendation to council for funding either to support increased bylaw enforcement or to invest in bear-resistant receptacles. And the landfill and transfer station, as per their operational certificate, just ensure daily inspections are conducted, though that those are outlined, that this becomes part of the operator's contract, and any breaches and failures are reported immediately and addressed in a timely fashion, also a requirement of the operational certificate, and that the municipality should do periodic inspections to ensure that the fence is in compliance. Last year, we did see a significant increase in commercial and multi-dwelling dumpsters, issues with those overflowing, bears climbing in, garbage behind, garbage all over the place. So we'd like to see that addressed. And there's, a number of different ways to address that. A lot of times we simply just had to call the building owner or the property manager, and those things were cleaned up. But we have a little bit more of a focus this year on these multi-dwellings. And we have been doing a lot of door-to-door education as well with them to get them where they need to be as well. We want to increase awareness of solutions in the community for organic vermicompost, the fruit cleaning. These are both two wonderful programs that certainly tie in and certainly help. And we should be collaborating with these solution providers as well. Again, there's more detail in the package that you were sent. Implementation of Bear Smart bylaws. You already have a bylaw. It's my understanding it is under review. Sean was provided with a wildlife attractant bylaw toolkit for 2022, which will help you address some of the weaknesses or loopholes that you may find. We would like to see cooking oil and grease adopted into that bylaw. And as well, I'm going to talk about backyard chickens here a little bit more, but address backyard chickens by either disallowing them in the bylaws or allowing them under Bear Smart conditions, which would require the use of an electric fence. So even since I produced this, there are now 5 known residents that I know of with backyard chickens. One also has ducks, and there's another resident that has beehives. Rules surrounding backyard chickens vary across the country, and surprisingly, there's only a few major cities that allow them. Consideration should be given to including both chicken and beehives in a single bylaw, and perhaps calling it an urban livestock bylaw or something along that nature. The above pictures just kind of show you, what a bad chicken coop looks like and what a good chicken coop looks like, and what'll happen to your chickens if you don't provide an electric fence or the appropriate, protection for those chickens. Revised planning decision-making documents. We're going to talk about that a little bit further on. It doesn't have to be overly hard, but you should try and incorporate Bear Smart language into your OCP. produce a Bear Smart development and planning guide for developers, which will include the bylaw, some of the zoning bylaw stuff, part of the subdivision development bylaw, and that the excerpts from the official community plan identify all Bear Smart requirements, and just ensure that staff have the policies around that, and ensure that any new landscaping done by the municipality and developers is consistent with Bear Smart principles and does not include highly attractive plants to bear, such as fruit or nut-bearing trees and shrubs. And it doesn't have to be hard. I've given you 2 examples where Port Hardy has simply just said, one line, require all new development to follow provincial Bear Smart guidelines. And Castlegar has done something very similar and just reduce the amount of unnatural attractions, blah, blah, blah. You can read it there. So it's not hard to introduce those things into your planning documents. It sounds onerous, cumbersome, but it's really not. Pretty much the same slide. Development permits should require the construction of bear-resistant solid waste infrastructure, and that landscaping plans should not include strong bear attractants. Again, land use planning and maintenance. We've talked about this a lot. Identify, and we've already done this with the BHA, the travel corridors and the bear habitat. We've talked about in the Bear Hazard Assessment a lot about where we put new parks, where we put future trails or bike trails, and that we should be avoiding the established known bear habitat in those wildlife travel corridors, and that we're already doing a really good job here. There's, community brushing the community trail. It improves sight lines to prevent surprise encounters from bears. And again, you've already done some of this, maintaining and adding signage to alert trail users of bears in the area or that they're in bear country. Again, the trail provides a considerable community appeal, and it provides a beautiful winding pathway for locals to wander through the forest. Unfortunately, this trail also provides easy access to grasses and other natural vegetation, as well as safe escape routes for bears to efficiently access non-natural foods within the community. It's like a freeway. A report was prepared by an arborist, and it was forwarded to the Recreation Center as well as Public Works to consider recommendations for both short and long-term strategies to manage the existing fruit-bearing trees that we have in the community and that we know are already causing issues. And as well, WildSafe BC did provide you with a tree or shrub list that rates each species from low to high, depending on their attractiveness to wildlife, period. School district number 81, you can see work with GWO Carlson to replace open receptacles with bear-resistant models. Ensuring that children play parks are highly visible, that they're not necessarily pushed back the way they are, that they clear some of the clearings out there. Consider installing fencing as barriers, and hopefully we can find some courses of funding to offset what it would cost them. And some of the schools, particularly GWO Carlson, do have significant berry producing shrubs all along the fence that the kids play in. Derelict and abandoned properties, the municipality has done a great job last year and this year. They are supporting with increased bylaw enforcement. We're seeing it all over the place. We're seeing them out there mowing lawns and whatnot. This is awesome. And we should continue ongoing partnerships with Fort Nelson First Nations on an annual basis regarding that as well. And again, just since I've reproduced this, I just heard that BC Hydro had made a commitment to fix or repair 200 light posts. I think I heard that from the mayor. So that should take care of a lot of this. I don't have a timeline, but nonetheless, it's been identified. We've identified it. It's now identified that insufficient street lighting is also a problem. Some of your streets, Gardner Crescent, Tamarack, 2 of the most busy in terms of traffic with bears, are also very, very dark. They have very, very few street lights, or very few street lights that actually work. So in at the very back of your human bear conflict management plan, you'll find a summary of recommendations. It talks about issues, it talks about short-term action, long-term action, who should be taking control of that, who should be doing it, and the progress to date or progress that needs to be made, or some of them are even blank. This is where we need the municipality's help. This is designed to be a living document. It is adaptive in nature, but there are some blank spaces that need to be filled in by mayor and council. As well, they need to look at the progress as well as the short and long term and make sure that these are achievable. Because again, like I said, we want you to be successful. If you don't think you can get something done in a year, then maybe we should move it into more of a medium-term action plan. So certainly willing to work with you there. I'm going to thank the Northern Rockies Regional Municipality for their commitment to reducing human-wildlife conflict in their community and providing staff expertise, time, and funding to support this work that you're seeing. And then I'm just going to quickly turn it back over to Vanessa for a moment.
And again, I want to reiterate that we're grateful for all the hard work that has been done by all the stakeholders and partners on this project. We feel confident that if we can secure these attractions in the community and support and remove barriers for the public to adopt best practices, that you will in the long term reduce conflicts in your community with bears, which will lead to a safer community for everyone involved. So thank you for your support in this.
There's one more slide, I think. And just if there's any questions, we did, you guys have all of this information in advance. There's the bear hazard assessment, there's a human bear conflict management plan. It's a lot of information to absorb. And are there any questions from mayor or council or even staff for that matter?
Councillor Gerwin.
Yeah, I just had a question around the landfill fence has not been maintained consistently and bears have breached the fence. Is that like a common occurrence? Is that a one-off? That's the first I've heard of it. So just some more background information on that if somebody could.
As far as I know, it's only happened a couple of times, but a couple of times is too many, considering that their operational certificate does tell them there are certain things that they have to do. So that actually shouldn't be happening. So it doesn't happen all the time, but there has been instances where the fence has, and this was from the contractor, has been instances where the fence hasn't been working and then the fence is working and they've had a black bear in there when they fixed it and then it can't get out.
Mr. Barry, did you want to address that?
Yeah, so last year we actually did have a situation where the fence was breached and there was a black bear that was a problem black bear that was accessing the landfill active phase. And it was recognized at that time, and actually myself and the CO, Jeff, went down, so Clancy had actually taken a walk around the fence and found out where it was actually breached it, and there was an issue with the maintenance at the time, which is actually responsibility of the contractors laid out quite clearly in the contract. So that issue was rectified, and I won't go into detail on how that was done, but it was eventually. And then there was some issues also with the gate, so the fence can work as well as it can if the gate's wide open. The bears that'll walk right through the gate also. So there was a couple instances there where we had some issues where the gate was being left open. It's an auto open or close, so it's not a matter of having to drag it closed or anything. It's just a matter of push the button after a vehicle has gone in or out of the active phase. So there was a couple of situations, but I don't think we've had anything otherwise this year. Yeah. So, and then this year, I mean, we had to delay the charging of the fence because of late spring, but that's just a communication that we have with the Ministry of Environment based on our operating permit. Because if you got 3 feet of snow against electric fence, it's not great to charge it, or you only charge certain strands that are above any water or any moisture. So it's effectively been rectified.
Councillor Andrews.
I noticed in our bylaw, it says that our garbage cans have to be metal and all of our cans out on the street are plastic. With the bear proofing that's been being done to them, has that been helping?
I think the metal garbage cans is referring to the commercial bins and not the residential bins.
Okay, but still with the residential bins that we've been adding the bear proofing to, has that been helping at all?
I think it's too early to tell.
Okay.
The CO may think otherwise.
We had a survey, so we did send out a survey out to residents who have the bins, and we did receive some responses. There was mixed responses as far as how people like them or didn't like them, or how effective they were. So we're still working on that.
And I've got a
Maybe I should jump in.
Yeah, Mr. Clancy, if you would, just so Ms. Snarty,
Reverse otherwise.
so Ms. Snarty can hear what the conversation is.
So I've had a couple residents, just, in communications with them, giving feedback and saying that those bins are working. They've actually watched bears tip them over and try to get into them, just like we had it down in Kamloops. So they're working so far, as long as they're clipped.
Councillor Gervin.
So I had a community member approached me and he or she wants to get a bin. Can anybody get them, or do you have to not have a safe place to store your garbage and meet any kind of criteria, or can they just phone up and say, I want to get a bin?
Mr. Barry.
So we did have criteria. We only produced so many of the bins, or I guess so many of the adapters or whatnot to put on the bins. And at first it was based on location, and if you had the ability to store it in a safe place. It's my understanding, I think we've increased that in terms of certain areas based on some discussions we had in previous meetings. But one of the conversations, and it's one of the potential recommendations in the plan, is to basically blanket and just do the bins, which all of the bins, which I don't have a number in front of me. I don't know if we actually produced one or not, but it'd be very easy to have an idea what that cost would be based on that, which would make sense. Honestly, it's one, in my opinion, it's one of the gaps that we currently have with the bins. And I think this is to go off what Jeff just said, based on the testing that was done, even though we didn't pass the test, but two very large grizzly bears decided to chest pump the bins and eventually get into them. But the reality is that it took significant effort to get into the bins and break the mechanism. But the reality is that it's a lot harder than if you just tip the bin over and the garbage falls out. So we're not calling them bear proof bins, but we're not calling them bear resistant. And I think it's one extra step, as long as they're locked, is one extra step to help restrict that reward, or prevent, that reward when the bear tries to get into it.
So until such time as anything is approved here, can I refer this resident to somewhere to get a locking bin?
Get them to contact Public Works. What I don't know is what I don't know how many we do actually have left. So I don't have that number, but if they contact Public Works, they'll inform for sure. And then of course we're in communication, and there might be opportunities and to get
My
the
understanding
devices.
is there are no bins left. However, there are rental properties that remain vacant that do have those bins, and the municipality, last I talked to Sean, they could be swapped out if we absolutely needed to do that.
Is this because of bears knocking over the non-bear proof bins during garbage pickup? Is that the issue?
So the locking mechanisms are required to be unlocked during pickup, and that's the reason why we have a short window of time. But the intent of it is also to provide an alternate ability for a resident when they're storing their waste in that bin. If they were storing the bin, if it was in their yard, or they never had a suitable place to put it, that those bins need to be locked, so it's not just easy access.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gerwin.
Sorry, another question. So throughout the summer, so I walk a lot, right? And so from time to time, I see overflowing bins at apartment buildings or businesses, whatever. I don't know like who to call. It's usually in the evening or it's on the weekend. And so, I call Kim. But there should be, I know, right? So I don't know, I would like to see, even before we approve anything else, if there wasn't some number that residents can call, because, if we can prevent the bears or the wildlife from getting into these overflowing bins, then, I think that we should do that. But where do you call?
So Northern Properties has a considerable amount of apartment buildings. All of their signs have their, I believe it's a 1-800 number. I've called it multiple, when you've called me, I've just called the 1-800 number and said, hey, this is what's going on. They've been very quick to clean it up. Their manager here has also been very, very helpful. She's given me permission to, like I said, we have done some door to door, specifically in the townhouses, in the townhouse area where we have had quite a few instances. She's given me position, and that is private property, so it's a little bit different. I have done the entire complex, the Klondike townhouses, spoken to probably half the residents, and a lot of it is empty right now. They're getting much better. But I don't know, could they call this the COs? Not that I'm trying to, but that's not really.
The enforceability is there, right? It's you're in
Could be
violation of the
bylaw.
bylaw.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to. And that's what we see overflowing, the bins out on the curb too early, they're in violation of the bylaw.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we have identified that as a gap for sure.
And
Because if it's on a weekend or in the evening, then there is.
And Southwich Mobile Home Park, another area that we had starting at the beginning of the year, end of last year, beginning of this year, we did have some issues with their bins as well. He has now switched out his bin to a bear resistant commercial bin, and he's actually moved it from the tree line to the right in the center of the mobile home park.
I think it's a lot of issues, to be honest.
Yeah. So sometimes that tree line and not having unfortunately, those bins were used a lot by non-residents of the mobile home park, just as a dumping ground. They don't want to pay the $5 or whatever. There's furniture being thrown in there. So then the residents throw their garbage in on top. And next thing you know, you've got a black bear, like pretty much right in there. So I haven't seen or heard of anything since he switched out that bin and moved it.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Very well, hearing none. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you for having me.
Ms. Snarty, thank you very much. Mr. Clancy, thank you. Admin report number 64, bear response in the community. Ms. Thompson.
Can I stay?
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. So before you is a report that our building inspector / bylaw enforcement officer, Sean O'Shaughnessy, put together prior to leaving for vacation. I just wanted to thank WildSafe BC and Conservation Officer Services for their presentation. It was really informative. One of the things I learned when I looked through the Human Bear Conflict Management Plan was there's really 4 pillars to the plan. So in its simplest form, the Human Bear Conflict Management Plan is really contingent on public education, community awareness and support, having an effective solid waste management plan, and the development and implementation of policies and bylaws and procedures that will help support having a bear-safe community. So this report was drafted in consideration of that, and the options that we've put forward for Council's consideration are reflective of those pillars. The report covers off some information regarding management attractants and the conflict between the current bylaw in relation to the the garbage bins that we're currently providing. Council's already had a discussion regarding that, but at the end of the report, option number 2 speaks to that aspect. In response to sightings, essentially, the Conservation Officer Service has a matrix that they follow when they do receive a call regarding bear sightings. During the presentation that the Conservation Officer Service provided to us on June 21st, it was apparent that safety is a shared responsibility, and that Northern Rockies Regional Municipality has a role in ensuring that we're enforcing our own bylaws when it comes to safety in the community. For that reason, we've included an option number 1 at the end of the report, which I'll cover off related to that aspect as well. The report goes on to talk about public education and how we can play a role in that aspect, as well as one of the pillars I spoke to regarding community awareness and support, and council consideration of sending out that survey to our community members, which will really help to inform things like policy revisions, bylaw revisions, and that sort of thing. So at the end of the report, we've got 3 options that council may wish to consider, and that is that staff investigate options and costs related to the employment of a dedicated bylaw enforcement official,
Number 2, that staff further investigate the types and costs associated with the implementation of mandatory bear-resistant garbage bins in areas pertaining to the garbage disposal and wildlife attractants bylaw. And that staff engage with WildSafe BC to send the human bear interaction survey out to the public to better inform our policies and decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Thompson? Very well. No comments. Can I get a motion then? Oh, go ahead, Councillor.
So on option number 2, that staff further investigate types and costs associated with the implementation of mandatory bear-resistant garbage bin in the areas. Are we talking the whole town? Are we talking about just having them available for people that want them? Like, what exactly what's the intent of that option?
We will do whatever council would wish to do in that regard, but essentially, you know, I mean, the thinking was having them as mandatory within the town limit sort of thing. So not necessarily rural areas, but areas in town. So council may wish to choose to do something a bit different though.
Yeah, I mean, I think like there's, just from my perspective, there's a cost associated with either going into new bins or retrofitting older bins. And for people that aren't interested in using the locking mechanism, like, is there a point to providing them with a bin? They're not going to use it anyways. So would that be a waste of dollars? But if we're talking about purchasing new bear resistant bins, then like that's a different, like I would have different feelings about that. So currently, I think it would make sense is all of those people that are interested in getting a bear resistant bin that is available, advertised and is available and offered as options when we are ticketing or when we find ourselves in situations that a bear is getting into residential garbage. So that's kind of how I'm thinking. And just the wording is not clear what the intent is there for me.
So I think this is where, like, honestly, council has an option. So if you want to make them, you know, optional, that's a lot different than mandatory, right? So I think this is where council has an opportunity to say, these are going to become mandatory over time. Start off with an approach like you've suggested of having enough available for, you know, a certain percentage of the population. But we can certainly investigate costs and options.
Mr. Barry?
So I think one of the challenges, and I'll go back to enforcement at first, is we don't necessarily, because we're not proactively enforcing the bylaw. So some people who don't necessarily manage their waste or garbage properly or appropriately based on the bylaw on their own property, if it's either locked in or they elect not to get a bin, there's no real initiative for them unless, worst case scenario, there's a bear hammering their bin, and then either bylaw or most cases it's the CO shows up and possibly fines because of an attractant issue, right? So one of the things is if it was optional, and we do have people who have called since, so we do have a bit of a waiting list, and I'll just communicate this briefly there. She's suggested there's probably a dozen or more that have called since we've run out. But there's others that don't want to use it, and the challenge that we've had is the fact that because we don't have adequate enforcement or capacity to enforce adequately, there's no real initiative for people to fix the issue because no one's really challenged them or essentially the behavior to be enabled, right? And I think you'd get more interest if it wasn't mandatory, if people realize that, or if the bylaw was effectively enforced and they didn't have their bin stored properly, and they were there was a negative reward, for lack of better words, a fine or a warning and then a fine for people to try to fix the issue and reduce the potential for that wildlife attractant. So it kind of comes down to what the approach is and what council would like to do. I mean, one of the things that our stumbling block, our gap in the process here has been truly the fact that we have bylaws in place that says you can't do this. You can't have fruit bearing trees. We've got fruit bearing trees, right? And we're working through that, the arborist piece, right? And it's we either say you can or you can't. If you can't, then we either deal with it, or we're just still going to have the same issues. And similarly, we say you can't do this, or you can't. You need to store your garbage a certain way, but we don't enforce it adequately just because of the way that our enforcement currently is structured.
No, I totally get that. And I totally 100% agree with revamping our, as you know, our enforcement policies and then actually how we carry them out. I guess my only concern is I don't have any garbage. So I have this big, huge garbage bin and it's in my garage behind a big wooden door, nothing in it because everything's recycled and worm cotton. An additional garbage can is a waste of dollars for me. Just for my reals. That's all that I was thinking is like, do we want to revamp for everybody or on the case that you just came? So there is a bear that got into, let's just pretend my neighbor's garbage. And then he or she is offered a bear resistant bin, right? But we have to have those available. So that's kind of where I was headed with that.
I think under options 1 and 2, we're asking staff to investigate these and investigate the costs related to both options 1 and 2. And then when they bring them back, we can go from there. And because then we'll have an idea what this is going to cost the municipality and how we want to proceed. So I would recommend that we approve 1, 2, and 3. And so that we know what we're looking at here for costs. So I'll make the motion. We approve 1, 2, and 3, seconded by Councillor Andrews. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Administration report number 65, Animal Welfare Service Procurement. Ms. Shepherd.
Hi, Mayor and Council. So this report outlines the work to date on animal control and welfare services and asks for Council's direction in determining what the next contract opportunity for animal welfare services looks like. As Council is aware, the NRM has provided municipal pound keeping and animal control services for many years, and Humane Society services have sometimes been available through nonprofit groups, but have not been a contracted service. Over the last several years, service gaps have been highlighted in current animal services, and Council is asked to review these to develop more cohesive operations and potentially increase service levels. Increased service levels may include things like emergency care for neglected or abandoned animals, facilitation of foster adoption services, public education about animal welfare and the animal control bylaw, extended service hours, including increased animal control patrols and complaint response, and facilitation of spay and neuter clinics. Following many discussions with other municipalities, a couple of common models for municipal animal control and animal welfare services were outlined in the report. Most commonly, there are dedicated municipal bylaw officers providing enforcement for all bylaws, including animal control, and a contract for impounding is held by an external organization. In some unique circumstances, when there are really large external organizations offering comprehensive services, municipalities sometimes contract out a comprehensive package of animal welfare services. So again, today we are asking Council which animal control, animal welfare services would Council like to see in the next procurement opportunity. They're highlighted at the end of the report there, including the increased animal control level of service, facilitation of foster care, adoption services, coordination of spay and neuter clinics, rehabilitation of injured or abandoned animals, emergency care, public drop-off of animals for a decision.
Thank you. Any comments? So I have a question. The combined services, the comprehensive service model that Dawson Creek, Nanaimo, and North Cowichan have, the cost is $140,000 to $190,000 annually. How does that compare with the services that we are providing now with our animal control services at $33,000 and pound keeping at 31,000.
So in both Dawson Creek and the other municipalities that are having that model, they have the SPCA in Dawson Creek. So that's a provincial organization with many, many resources. And they essentially, they pay the SPCA $190,000 in 2020. And they also gave them a parcel of land and they do a dog park there. But the SPCA has, I think, 4 to 6 animal control officers on staff. They've got far-reaching resources available to them. Down in the Lower Mainland, there are a number of communities using another organization called Coastal Animal Services, which is very similar. The SPCA and Coastal, whichever it was, they have animal control officers who are certified through Langara College. A number of mechanisms in place within those organizations. And how does that compare? Yeah, so we in the NRM currently paying the total was 64,800 for just impounding and animal control with the limited services. So we don't offer any of that spay, neuter, foster, adoption, any of those, what we would maybe call humane society services, emergency care, abandoned animal care and rehoming and feral colony management, public education, those types of services we don't currently offer.
So the model for bylaw enforcement, I'm just wondering what the implications are of having NRM staff enforcing bylaws.
We currently do that now, sir. It's contracted out.
And it speaks in the report here of some liability issues around that because they're not employees.
Yeah, I think in terms of contractors, I mean, myself and Hillary actually talked a bit about this yesterday, actually. The reality is that if we hire a contractor under our employee, I mean, just because you're not an NRM employee per se, if you're a contractor, you're still working on our behalf, and then the liability still be with us. We're still required to ensure that people perform the duties and the tasks are meet the standards or meet the proper training and whatnot to do those tasks, right? So,
is there a deficiency here we have a contract, we have somebody who's not an NRM employee, but I suppose we can direct them to, I'm just thinking if they are doing something that is contrary to the policies of the NRM, I suppose that would be in the contract. It would be
we would deal with them no different than we deal with an employee. Basically, I wouldn't necessarily get hung up as a contractor or an employee. It's more around the service. And honestly, a contractor at this point, especially if we're looking at trying to test something, is much better because it gives us way more flexibility in terms of how we do that. Especially when you look at the fact that there's a likelihood that you'd have possibly more service requirements in the summer than you would in the off season in winter. For many things, not just animal control, for many bylaw enforcement.
Yep.
The reality right now is what we've heard from council in the past from a feedback perspective is that the bylaw enforcement specific to animal control, the service level hasn't been adequate. The service gap is the amount of time that the bylaw enforcement officer is available, either from a response perspective or even a patrol perspective. And that's strictly a contractual issue, which obviously if you increase that, we're going to most likely pay more. But I would be in agreement that, based on the calls you received and responses and some of the concerns and the after hours piece, and there's some flexibility in the contract, but when you look at the total hours available in the contract, not necessarily meeting, I don't think, what council would expect.
Right.
So from that perspective, that's a gap. And then from an animal welfare perspective, we have very basic animal welfare services. Basically, we have a pound, which does house an animal. We currently have a resolution of books that there is no euthanization that's occurring, which can get costly. So that's a base price that Hillary is basically provided, because the pound contract outlines housing animals for a certain period of time. Anything above a certain, I don't have it off the top of my head, anything, and it was previous, it's in the previous report. So anything past that time then starts to, we're paying a daily fee, right? Yeah, so it can get quite expensive, but bottom line is that, you know, from an animal welfare perspective, we have I'll call it very basic services compared to some other municipalities. So the question is, does council A want to increase how we enforce our bylaw, and B, do you want to increase the services around the animal welfare? It's probably fair to say, right? Yeah.
Councillor Penny.
I just think back when we had Takashi's Animal Rescue here, and it definitely seemed like there was an outpour of support, you know, financially and in-kind services, stuff like that to help them go. Obviously, there wasn't enough support, volunteers to actually manage the amount of animals that were going through there, and which is what I think in turn caused it to collapse or close, whatever happened there, because they were overworked. So obviously, I think there's a definite need here, and we saw this with the puppies that we had to deal with over here and whatever trailer park it was. So I definitely think we have a need here, and it seems to be quite a desire of residents from what I've spoken to that would want to see us move forward with more of a all-encompassing animal control, which is listed out in here. Obviously, we have to come up with some sort of price, but I see it's something that our residents have been asking for, and there's a need here for.
Councillor Souls.
It would appear that you don't know what you've got till it's gone. Sometimes it's relevant, and I think that that's the case in the world of Takashi's and what they were offering as the approach. And so I question whether or not we've been funding the wrong mechanism all along, because we get almost zero. I'd like way more information on what our pound actually does. How used is it? Is the $30,000 a year budget that is our contracted budget for the pound, is that something that is fully utilized, or is it utilized plus, as in keeping animals longer? Like, we don't have a lot of information on the pound. So just thinking back, I think of how Takashi's was a very public Facebook page, rants and raves. It was very visible. The pound is like it's invisible. And we have no insight into it. So I'd like some insight before you start deciding how to create a new system.
Mr. Barry.
Well, additional, if you're going to respond to.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, what the pound does, and again, it provides basic services, but from a contractual perspective, what it allows us is if we collect an animal, they guarantee that they're going to take it at any given time. So there's a price tag attached to that. So it's, I mean, some weeks could be busy, some days might not be, or weeks might not be. But the reality is that at any time when we need to impound an animal or bring an animal to the pound, they receive it. And that's the important piece of the contract. There's a price tag to have that availability in place. Just like if you were to have someone on call 24/7, there's a tag. You might not get called, but at least if the phone rings, you know that someone's answering. So that's the big piece with the pound, because to have someone, I mean,
No,
the pound might not receive an animal for 3 weeks or a month, but they still need to be prepared to answer that phone at any given time based on the contractual obligation, which would be a challenge if it was, say, a nonprofit, unless we were in a contractual agreement with them that require the same. Because the worst thing you want is the minute any given time when the contractor picks up an animal, they have to have the ability to bring and store that animal. And then, of course, there's certain requirements that need to be met to store it too, of course. And whatnot. So understanding what you're saying, and the challenge of this is the reason for the conversation, because like right now we provide, that pound provides basic services, but it doesn't have a drop-off opportunity for the public. It doesn't have other services that mainly because our contract has never required it, and there might be even certain limitations that it can or can't do.
Councillor Gerwing.
So Councillor Slows, understand your need for numbers, but I don't think that the numbers are going to tell the true story, because in my opinion, over the last number of years, we have very limited animal control services. So we can say, yeah, nothing's been dropped off at the pound for a month, but that's not necessarily because there shouldn't have been. It's because we have limited animal control services in the town.
Which is why I asked,
Exactly.
is the thing
yeah.
actually being used? Is the
But-
pound actually got an actual use that we can identify?
I think it does, in my opinion, but we haven't been taking advantage of that option because we have not had the same patrolling. We've not had the same call responsibility. But what I wanted to say is that, so I read this entirely different than the rest of you. So I'm glad I waited till last to speak. It says, to that end, does council wish to enhance current services provided by the municipality? So I read that as that we would do all of this, like that we would hire the staff, that it would become like a department in the municipality. And that wouldn't be the way I would wish to go, although I agree with Councillor Penny that people are asking for much of this. So my comments were that I would like to support the current not-for-profit that is offering most of these services except for the increased animal control. I very much agree that if that would be possible to marry that into a bylaw position, bylaw enforcement position, if that's possible, I think that could work very well. And then the rest of it, I think between the current kennel business and the not-for-profit, I wouldn't want to compete with that in terms of bringing in something fully conducted by the municipality. But that said, and we are reviewing the way we fund groups in the community. So the top three, so the library, the Phoenix Theater, and like all the rest of the groups, right? All of that's being reviewed. And part of that review was a mechanism for new not-for-profits in town to come to council and become part of that consistent funding. And so that's what I would like to see, or I wonder if that would be a really good way to proceed in terms of, I think it's North Paw or Northern Paw, is doing all of this work except for the enforcement piece. So that was my comments.
Any other comments? I agree with you, Councillor Gerwing. I think that's what we want, is to see more consistency here and perhaps amalgamate the pound keeping services with the rest of this. And I think the idea of having a sort of a nonprofit part of this, as well as a pay for service through contracts with the municipality, is the way to go. I'd like to see a more enhanced version of animal control as well. And even if we have to expand that to, I don't know if you want to do 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but I certainly think it can expand from where it is, to at least include weekends and maybe move to 12 hours a day. My thoughts on it anyway. Councillor Gerwing.
If I could add to your comment, and I don't know that whether this is appropriate or not, might not be, and I'm okay, but if we do go that route, then if this person could be trained in terms of responding to bear sightings, and I know we're going down a dark alley here, but
No, we're not. Okay, keep talking.
Okay, keep going. So, I mean, the CO doesn't have a role in situation X. They want us to call it in. Our residents, I think we're all hearing from our residents that they're reluctant to call it in for any number of reasons. One of the reasons is that, they don't see any reaction. I'm not saying there isn't a reaction, and I'm not saying that the COs and WildSafe BC, that I believe they're all doing an amazing job. But wouldn't it be great if, what happened to my family the other day at 2:00 in the afternoon, mama and three, wouldn't it be nice if we could call somebody that was trained to help push that bear family back where they belong and not further down into town? anyways, so if that could be incorporated within this increased animal control, I think that there's an opportunity there to perhaps look at that as well.
Mr. Barry?
So what we've talked about internally, so your timing is perfect, Councillor Goering. So what we have talked about is currently with the limited animal control enforcement from a bylaw perspective, if we were to increase that, it increases the potential response and patrol for, so just to say if it was 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, for example, and you'd float different days or whatnot, but it would increase the exposure and the availability for that for animal control. But at the same time, when you're patrolling and stuff, forget there's other things and duties that could be done as part of that, which would actually relieve. I mean, the bear response we talked about, the potential for checking when bins are out, because currently we don't have that ability now adequately. Similarly, the assistance around the property maintenance piece around traffic, because the fire department last month pushed close to over 300 hours of bylaw enforcement time. And we are currently close. We are at 290 calls year to date for the fire department, which we in the past used to go just maybe a call a day. So we're pushing a significant increase in our calls, which takes, and of course they're going to respond to a call from a first responder perspective before they do with a bin or an animal or whatnot. So we think there's some synergies that have the potential. So I mean, there was a reason for combining these reports today so that we can, because there's a bit of a theme. There's a bylaw enforcement gap that we have, and then specific to animal control, there's a gap there. So I think there's some synergies that we talked about that would be good if council's good that we could possibly include as a part of this whole picture. And then of course, look at the other pieces around the opportunities specific to the nonprofit and the pound keeping the whole animal welfare piece. So
Not feeding other dogs.
yes.
Any other comments? Very well. I think we have enough here that staff can work on this and bring us back something. Is that correct? We don't need a motion for anything, do we?
A motion just to bring a report back specific to the conversations that we had would be good, Mayor. The discussion we had will drive out what comes back, but just to bring another report back.
Okay, a motion, please. Moved by Councillor Gerwing. Second by Councillor Penny.
So specific to the bylaw enforcement piece and the potential to increase bylaw enforcement, specific to animal control and potential other activities or duties as required. Yeah. Yes, and then also specific to opportunities regarding the animal welfare and pound
Not to
keeping piece.
compete with.
Yes,
current,
yeah.
Services offered by not-for-profit and current kennel business in town, but instead looking for synergies to bring that all together.
I'll just ask one thing specific to the animal control enforcement from council. What would you think, and this is just more around start create some framework, what would you think would be a good availability perspective, like in terms of what would an expectation be? Because you can go all in, that's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which could get extremely expensive, or anything from where we currently are to that. So is there just a thought that you have?
Councillor Penny.
My initial thought is, like, I mean, I'd like to see us have 7 days a week. I don't think 24 hours a day is necessary, but even if it's, as Mayor mentioned earlier, maybe 12 hours a day, 5 days a week, and even if there's whatever we get on the weekends is going to be better than we have.
I got to argue. Sorry.
Councillor Andrews.
I think that our wildlife animal control should be 24 hours, at least to start with, maybe even in our peak times, maybe not in the winter. Animal control in the winter, probably not needed, but we've seen on the chart with the peak times for bears, like possibly around then. And if there are other like deer, Councillor Goering mentioned, Bylaw 7 days a week would be nice. I don't think we need 24-hour bylaw coverage, but at least maybe during our quiet hours, or like a little bit out, like noise bylaw wise, maybe, but something enhanced better than what we have is definitely what I'm looking for.
Councillor Gerwin.
Sorry, I said the wrong word. I don't mean to argue. I mean, I will add to what you had to say. I think it's very important that we have service on the weekend. That's when a lot of people in the summertime are out and about on our streets. Then yeah, if we could have it 7 days a week, fine, but absolutely it's imperative to have something on the weekend, because I feel that there are so many people out and about. And also that's when the industrial bins are very much overflow or can be overflowing. And I can't call Public Works, right? Because it's closed Monday, they offer Monday to Friday services. Yeah, so that's why I think that it should absolutely be service on the weekend. I'm not sure how I feel about the 24-hour. And if we are going to include the bear response piece, then we absolutely have to have evening hours. That's when the bears are more active. And but then you could also say early morning hours are the same, right? So
Maybe we could start heading off with 7 days a week, 12 hours, and maybe we could get an idea of the cost of increasing that to longer hours, even if it's in the summer or something for the bear response.
Gives us a starting point. When we build contracts, we can have base fees and then additional costs per hour if required, and as required that you can give direction and monitor and stuff. But it just gives us a bit of framework, I think, hey, Hillary, in terms of a starting point for that piece. For our internal as we start to build it.
And then for council's consideration, we know how much money we're looking for how much further enhanced from the 12 hours a day, and may go to longer, but at least we have a number. At least we have a number. We know what we're looking at. Any more? There was a motion. Sorry.
There was one on. Yeah.
Councillor Souls, we'll go back to the motion. We'll go back to the motion later.
The animal control side of things is only needed when it's needed. It's not needed when it's not needed. Right? It's actually there's no effect when it's needed. And the whole world of us, we're so used to time clocks that we tend to try to make it work this way. And I'll just describe it. I've been on animal control for a long, long time. Well, it's a different type, but it actually has a parallel. That is, because I've had cows grazing out this way, west of town for quite a few years, and I've got some grazing out east of town, and then we have some in McConaughey. Every time someone sees a cow out anywhere in the Northern Rockies, I get a call because one of your cows is out. Well, there's a few other people with cows too, and their fences aren't as good as mine, so it's not always my cows. But the thing that I think works well, the animals don't choose to, they actually do choose to misbehave on the weekend when there's no one on call, because that's what animals do. They seem to know that, just like in the hunting season, the moose and the elk know exactly when the date is, and they know when to hide. So I think that the reality is that you need, in the animal control world, we need someone who's on call all the time. Someone who likes to be on call all the time, but don't give them a scheduled work at all. Someone who's on call all the time, because there are people who actually like that form if that's what they're good at. And it's just a better way of approaching. It's a more natural way of approaching the thing, but it's less structured. So I get the difficulty of making that fit.
So I hate to draw a parallel between being an apartment owner and animal control, but I mean, as an owner, I am on call 24 hours a day. But in the past 2 years, I don't think I've been called past. All right, so maybe it's a dozen times in 2 years been called after 6 o'clock in the evening. So I mean, it's one thing to be called out 3 times a week. It's a different thing to be called out once a month or less. So I think, we have to keep in mind the frequency of the call outs, because somebody's on call doesn't mean that they're going out every night for something. But if we want to look at that, we need to have a number to see how much this costs us and what the frequency is, et cetera. So, any other comments? Okay, Councillor Gerwin?
Sorry, I'm just wondering when a report, what's the timeline on something coming back to council?
I guess I could jump in and just, I'm looking for confirmation that you want a report of the options, or you would like to see a tender go out and find out what comes back for costs. Because I think that we've seen kind of what the value is of contracts of services provided in other municipalities. So the next step, if all of these services are what council is looking for, it might be to see what comes out of a tender.
I think we're looking at a report to come back, first of all, to give us some idea around costs. Mr. Barry?
It's probably a bit of both. So in order to do it, we could go out and get some proposals, for example, and because I think we have to canvass groups like North Paws to see, because what I'm hearing, just to confirm, is that someone like North Paws could provide some other services, but also be a nonprofit organization. They could possibly look for an opportunity based on a process that we're currently in the process of developing from a nonprofit funding perspective to look for funding from municipality to provide a service to the communities for a nonprofit. In conjunction with that, we need animal control. So if it's increased services, we would go to our existing service provider, for example, and say, if we were to change our contract to X, what would it be? Like, just to get an idea.
Yep.
And then similarly, the pound currently is the pound, so I think the services there would generally be provided the same unless we switched that. So if you're looking for some pricing to come back, then we need to reach out and we need to go to the market and just go and find out what those numbers are based on that framework. And that was why it's important to get an idea from council what you're looking for.
But you wouldn't have to necessarily go to tender. You could just
Yes.
gather this information organically, my new word.
Yeah.
Right?
We would reach out, but at least that would help us start framing that tender. So and we'd work with Hill to help us, because we've done this in the past. I know Hill had the exposure is much for that, but we wouldn't necessarily go to tender
Yeah. Okay.
until we came back from council, brought a report back to council, and you said, yes, this is what we want to do.
Right. This is how
and
much
then-
it's
and then
gonna
we
cost. We
decide
could
actually-
change our direction.
And then we'd actually decide also how we would procure it. Would it be a tender or would it be a request for proposals? And that depends on how prescribed the work is that we want to procure, right? So
Councillor Gerwin, your original motion request for proposals,
No, it was a report.
a report on.
Report. Right.
report with some costing is what you would like based on the framework we discussed today. And we'll go out and basically test the market to see what opportunities, because in the meantime, Hill has a good relationship with the various service providers. So at that time, we can also see what some potential opportunities are that they may or may not be able to provide, because there's no sense to go to procurement if we get zero responses or zero. So we would frame it to kind of fit what the community can provide too.
And we didn't want to compete. Like that was,
That's an important piece,
I really think that's an important piece that we walk away from today, that we don't want to compete with North Paw. We don't want to compete with this kennel by creating our own NRM department, right? That this is,
So I'm just looking for some wording here around the motion. Ms. McIver, do you have enough to formulate?
Might not want to repeat it yet.
Just a yes or a no.
So I'm going to say, based on a request for proposals, that staff bring back a report for council to consider opportunities to combine the services of pound and animal welfare with a mind to supporting local not-for-profits.
That was exactly what Councillor Gerwin said. And didn't you second that? All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. And now we will briefly move on to the last item on our agenda here. Administration report number 66, Fire Hall and Public Works Building Foundation Repair Award. Mr. David Dominic. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Essentially the report in front of you is looking for us to award to BKT Wall for the foundational repairs on the Public Works and Fire Hall building. And those were repairs that were identified in a 2020 building assessment. Throughout the procurement process, only one submission was received, and it came in initially over budget. However, we subsequently worked with our sole proponent in this opportunity to find efficiencies within the proposed scope of work and refine the initial estimate. And following a review of the proponent's history and given the fact that they have positive past work experience with us, it's recommended to award to BKT Wall for the foundational repairs.
Is there any comments, councillors? Very well, I'll ask for a motion. Moved by Councillor Soul, seconded by Councillor Penny. All those in favor? Carried, and I will declare this meeting adjourned.